Good afternoon. I'm incredibly pleased to be welcoming everyone, especially Doug Leen and Brian Maebius, to our event today. Not only will we have these wonderful artists speaking on their work, but it also coincides with the reopening of our museum after 4.5 years on a hiatus. So really an exciting day for not only the Department of the Interior, but specifically the museum itself. And I am representing the museum here as the acting director. My name is Diana Ziegler. So again, welcome to the interior. We hope that you will take a couple of minutes after the lecture to join us in the museum gallery. It's on this level, just inside security. So please do take a look at the works after you've heard all of the wonderful history about them. So a little bit about this project. From 1938 to 1941, the National Park Service employed artists via the Works Progress Administration, so the WPA, and they were producing silk-screened promotional posters for the National Park Service sites. 14 designs were created during that time, and they were very well received. But when we entered World War II, these posters were kind of put on the shelf and forgotten to history until Doug Leen happened upon one at Grand Teton National Park. So that kind of invoked his interest in the poster project. That was in the 1970s, and here we are today with contemporary posters, as well as many more of the originals having been found because of the interest that his work has really put to this project. So we have just over 40 of these exceedingly rare national park posters having been resurfaced since then. Many are in the National Park Service archives with the Library of Congress, and then in private collections. Through the course of 2 decades and extensive research, Doug and his company, Ranger Doug's Enterprises, have not only successfully reproduced the 14 original WPA posters, but also working in collaboration with the individual parks, has created and screen printed more than 30 new designs. And they're all hanging in our galleries here at the Interior Museum. So they've all been done in the style of the WPA artists to keep this artistic tradition alive. Brian Maebius joined Ranger Doug's Enterprises in 2003 and has since designed 23 of the iconic posters, the most recent which depict Statue of Liberty, Joshua Tree National Park, and Death Valley National Park. Brian's background is in fine arts, geology, science education, and paleontology. He went to graduate school for science illustration, and when he's not designing Ranger Doug posters, he works in watercolor, acrylics, and pen and ink to create illustrations and interpretive pieces for many parks, natural history museums, land trusts, and nature magazines. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We welcome you to the Department of the Interior and also the Interior Museum. We are taping this event for posterity's sake, and we invite you to ask questions at the end of the lecture, but please do stand in front of the microphones so that we can tape not only your questions, but the comments of the artists. So please welcome Doug and Brian.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all for coming. This is, I think, the biggest crowd I've ever spoken to, except the next crowd down is the waiting room of my dental practice in Seattle, so this is kind of a new one for me. But thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Jason for discovering us and me discovering him, because it's been a real honor for me to sit in front of the Department of Interior and tell my story. It's quite an interesting one. First, just a couple of, I'm going to walk around, and I hope you can hear me with this mic. First of all, I'd like to, sort of a disclaimer. I'm not an artist. I'm an art aficionado. I love art. I collect it. I've got a good eye for it, but I have no formal training in it. And my profession is a dentist. I had a private dental practice in Seattle for 20 years. And after 20 years, just a bit about me, I decided that I was going to get as far from the city as I could, so I sold everything I own, and when you're sitting 20 years on a dental stool, you think, well, you know, in your Walter Mitty fantasy, I want to get an old tugboat and run up to Alaska on the Inside Passage So anyway, that's kind of where we were going with this. So this is just a couple of other disclaimers here. I really was a ranger. I worked 7 years in Grand Teton National Park. I worked at Jenny Lake Ranger Station. It was mountain rescue. It was the best job of my life. They paid me $3.10 an hour, flying helicopters that looked like they were built out of erector sets. And it was, in those days, that was considered a lot of fun. That was extreme. We have extreme everything today. My goal is to hang a WPA poster in every home in America. And maybe that's an overreach, but I do want to discover what's known about this set as much as I can and restore it and gather back the originals and put them back in the public domain. That's where they belong. And we have, I think, 5 in the museum today that are originals. We are a for-profit company, but we donate 1% of our gross sales, not our profits, our gross sales, back to the national parks, and this goes to art and architecture in the parks, restoring it. I'll show you one example here in just a minute. You can visit us at rangerdoug.com, and most of what I'm going to say today is on there in the history, and we've got links, and we'll probably link to this program as well. So anyway, I talked about going to Alaska. I'm going to start with 2 slides of Alaska, and then I'm going to go back at the end of my talk. I'll show you 2 more. But I did buy that old 1899 tugboat. This is the oldest working tug on the West Coast. I'm a sucker for projects, and this is my 3rd one. The first one sunk. So we started all over. I grabbed 2 old mountain rescue buddies, a couple cases of beer, I think, and Martina came with me, who hails from Munich. And here we are, 3 landlubbers in a 100-year-old boat, and we strike out for Alaska. And what are the chances of getting there on time and under budget? 100%. So anyway, we worked in the villages of Alaska and the southeast and treated dental disease there. And when we couldn't get there by boat, we took airplanes, and that had its share of excitement as well. So you probably thought dentists were these little guys in white smocks with funny round glasses, but really deep down inside were real adventurers. So let's see. I think I've got a line here. Is that right? There's one. I'm missing a slide, but it's statistics that Diane just gave you. And I'll leave this up because it's prettier. But between 1935 and 1943, the entire federal poster project produced 2 million posters. And those 2 million posters today, there are only 2,000. And Krista Noon in 1987 wrote the only definitive book on this. It was really off everybody's radar screen. I later talked to Chris. I said, Chris, did the WPA make any national park posters? I was sitting on some I wanted to publish, but if he had some originals, I needed to talk to him. If he didn't, then I needed to make up colors. And Chris said they didn't make any of the national parks. So here's, this was off his radar screen. And if this 2,000 that have been found is really 1/10 of 1% of the entire federal poster project that survived. 99.9% of our public art was thrown away. 35,000 designs. That means, assuming no redundancies, 33,000 prints, designs were lost forever. We'll never see them. One of those designs turned up in 1973, and it was the Grand Teton poster. I'll show you in a minute. This is my staff. It's Bert and Edna on the left, and they are the silhouette in one of the posters, historic posters, and my printer, 3rd from the left there, Scott Corey, made these up as kind of a gag. We take them to our trade shows, and they're part of the team now. We label them Bert and Edna, gave them names. Then there's yours truly, Lisa Bergman. Next to me is a concert pianist. She's a classic King FM radio announcer in Seattle, and she's the one that makes things happen. And she's my sister, I guess you'd call her, and best man at her wedding. Just a great gal. Scott Corey was a 3rd generation, he and his brother, and they published posters for 80 years. And he really is an artist in this. He can't be here, but this guy's screened probably 100,000 prints for us. Martina in the middle, but then we have Justine and Brian Maebius. Brian's my art guru, and without Brian, I wouldn't be standing here today. I owe a lot to Brian, and he's going to share with you what he does. The guy in the end is Charles Ziga Media, and he does calendars for us. They've been very popular. I don't normally like to do lithographic prints, and I don't like to print off shower. However, we get the message out, and it's really helped us reach many people we would not normally reach in the national parks. This is at a park trade show convention in Portland, Oregon. We have an annual trade show every year. I mentioned 1%. This is one of the projects we did. This is Calaware State Park, and these are fireplaces that were built by the CCC, and they all rotted apart. So we replaced all the steel works for them, and somebody else did the stonework. But this is the kind of stuff I love to do. So we do it. This is Grand Teton National Park. This is where I was my first job as a park ranger. To the right is Jenny Lake Ranger Station, a museum, about 2 miles, and to the left is the Taggart Creek Corrals. And every year we have a park cleanup. My boss said, Doug, would you come and help throw out a bunch of old junk? We got the pickup truck and a big trailer, and we started loading junk in it. And I noticed this poster hanging up on the barn, covered with cobwebs and dust. And I took it down, I looked at it, and here is, dusted it off, and I looked at it and I said, this really stands out. This is a silk screen print. That means there are many copies. It was done at the early part of the park's history. It's old. And I wonder, well, is this part of some kind of set? If they did Grand Teton, maybe they did Yellowstone. So I dusted it off, and I talked to my boss, and I said, this doesn't belong in the burn pile. And so I took it home, and it sat in my log cabin in Jenny Lake for 7 seasons, and took it back to college with me, and I looked at it every day for 20 years. And finally, 1993, the phone rings, and it's my boss's wife. She runs the bookstore at the Grand Teton National Park and the Visitor Center. She says, Doug, we just moved the Jenny Lake Ranger Station off the moraine over to the other side. It was an ecological move, cleaning up the shoreline, and this is a classic old log building, and we'd like to do a poster for it. And I said, do you have any good ideas? You worked in that for 7 years in this building. And I said, do I not only have a good idea, I've got the poster. So I mailed a copy down. This is snail mail days. And she said, where did you get this? And I said, Dunbar gave it to me. And, in 73, I didn't really think much of it. In 73, it was 30 years after it was printed, so it wasn't quite cool. It was cool. But if I tried to publish it then, and I thought about it, it would have flopped. And it would have been, wouldn't have taken off. So for 20 years, it was just just the time to happen. Charlene called, and she said, well, let's republish this thing. And she wanted me to send it down to her, and I said, it's going to end up back in the park burn pile I'll never see it again. And I kind of fallen in love with this poster, so I said, tell you what, I'll do it. I live in Seattle. You live in Moose, Wyoming. I can do it up here a lot better and faster. And we'll silk screen it. We'll print 500, and we'll sell them for $20 a piece. Well, I really undershot that one because I lost my shirt, broke even, let's say, at the best, but it was a lot of fun. 2 years later, when we sold out, I went to Charlene and I said, let's do it again. And she said, well, it was kind of fun, Doug, but I think we'll move on. And I said, come on, you got to. This is history. How about if I make a Yellowstone print, just like it, and we'll make it up, and we'll sell the two together, and then you can sell 2 prints, and they'll potentiate sales. So she finally relented. She said, okay, I'll do it. So I hired an artist. I went back to the guy that separated the screens, and I said, hey, I got another one for you. And he said, pay up. So I gave him $500. He painted up this nice poster. It was quite nice. And I was going to have it here today, and I can't find it, but I have it. And I thought, before I publish this, I better do my due diligence. I better look around. So I called Yellowstone, talked to Lee Whittlesley, and Mike Finley was an old ranger buddy with me in Grand Teton. He was superintendent then. And I said, hey, Mike and Lee, have you ever seen any Yellowstone prints like this or any other parks? And Lee scratched his head and he said, I've heard about these, but never seen one. Try Harper's Ferry. So I called up Harper's Ferry and I talked to Tom Durant, head of the print and photograph collection. Tom is a great guy. And he said, boy, Doug, it's strange you should call today. I just got off the phone with Grand Canyon Natural History Association, and they have an old print. And I said, well, what's the headline on it? Oh, it's got nothing, he said. I said, is there a Grand Teton in these? He had 13 photographs he said he was looking at, negatives. He's holding them up to the light. And let me see, he goes, and he looks for Grand Teton. He said, yeah, here's one here. I said, what's it say at the top? And it says, meet the ranger. And I caught the next flight to Washington, D.C. I rented a fast car, and I got a ticket getting out to Harper's Ferry because I was so anxious to get there. And I walked in to Tom Durant's desk, and I said, I'm Ranger Doug. Actually, I said I'm Doug because Ranger Doug hadn't been invented then. And these are the negatives that I found. And this was the holy grail that I've been searching for off and on for 20 years. And here you can see Yellowstone negative, and you can see Grand Teton below it. There's Yosemite and Fort Marion. These were very crude photographs that were taken in 1951. After the war, the Western Museum laboratories in Berkeley, California were cleaned out, and this went over to the federal building, Mint building in San Francisco. The original posters, and somebody took pictures of them, and these are the negatives from those pictures. And these negatives made it back to the federal archives, but the posters were scattered to the wind. And we don't know where they went. I've traced a few, and I'll get into that in a minute. When you make a print from these negatives, this is what you get. It's pretty crude. And, but we didn't know we had a Grand Teton, and that's only 4 colors. It's a simple, more simple art style. This has 6 colors in it, if I'm not mistaken. And this is the Grand Canyon poster. This is the most complex design of the 14. What does a park do? They cut a big space out and say, this is where you put your campfire program. You could just glue it over the top of the design anyway. So this is what I had to work with. And when you look at the design, it's 8 colors. This was the most complex design of all. So anyway, Tom, I kind of chatted with Tom about this, and I kind of looked over on his desk, and I memorized the phone number to Grand Canyon, and I called up Kim Buchheit, who was the head of, she was the art director there with the Natural History Association. I ran into the phone booth with my dental glasses and my funny white smock, and I came out 2 minutes later as Ranger Doug. And here's what happened in that phone booth. I asked him, I said, I've got just finished publishing some national park stuff, and I'm here talking to Tom Durant, and he says, you've got a poster you want to print, and where are you in this project? And she said, well, we gave up. Well, why did you give up? And she said, well, it's too expensive. And that second, Ranger Doug's Enterprises was born. And I said, well, I've got a company in Seattle, and we publish old WPA posters, and let me send you a sample. So I sent her down a sample of Grand Teton that Charlene and I had printed. And she sent it back, or wrote back, and she said, this is beautiful. Yeah, go ahead and print it. What do you think you can do it for? $30. We just added on $10. These are screen prints. And you cannot buy a screen print in America today for under $100. In fact, most of them are $400 and $500. So I kind of made a big leap of faith there. The original here is on the right. The one that we produced for them is on the left, and it was from a photograph. But this was the second poster that I'd done after Grand Teton, and this was absolutely a nightmare to produce, even with the original. It was 8 colors. Anyway, it was a big bite. But I still had to produce Yellowstone for Charlene so we could do our second edition of Grand Teton. And now I knew what it looked like, and it was based on this photograph by Haynes. The Haynes had a Photoshop in Yellowstone, and he took millions of pictures, I would guess, produced millions of postcards over many, many years. And this one photograph is the one that stands out of Yellowstone Geyser, and virtually everywhere you look today, it is this photograph that everything is copied from. I call it the 3-lobe eruption of the geyser. And Haynes' guide here on the left is produced, I think, 1916, and the date is in the museum there. And I'm making a broad assumption here, but I think I'm pretty close, that the WPA artist took this guide and made the poster from it, so we knew how it was made. This is the colors I thought it might be, but all I had was a black and white negative, so I just made them up. And then I go back and find these old guidebooks, and what are they? They're red and real bright colors and all that. This is the negative that we used, and for the first edition of the Geyser, we actually used a Xerox copy of a negative. That's what we had. That's all we had. This is what the poster turned out to be, totally different. This very poster turned up 6 months ago along with the Yellowstone Falls. This is one of 4 copies. It's in the other room. The Yellowstone Falls is the only copy I've ever seen, and it's also in the other room. But this is, we now publish this in both colors. If you look very closely at the bottom of that poster, you'll see the initial EM scribed in. The screen printer, just before the screen went down, signed it. And he probably wasn't the artist, and I'll tell you who the artist was in a minute. There's another guy named DM, and DM, I'll tell you who it is in a minute. But anyway, notice this when you go into the museum room. So how did these posters start? 1938, August 26th, Boss Pinkley, who was superintendent of Southwest Monuments, And I think Coolidge, Arizona, got a letter from Dor Yeager. Dor Yeager was assistant museum director at the Western Museum Laboratories. We had an Eastern Museum Laboratories at Harper's Ferry. We had a Western Museum Laboratories in Berkeley, California. And they commissioned this thing, and he said, encloses a bunch of samples, and just to show you what we can do, here's a Grand Teton poster. And that's not very good, they say. It's more or less an experiment. And we can do a lot better, especially in the lettering. It's in this letter. You can read it in the other room. And at the very bottom it says, please order a lot, because once the screens are destroyed, we can't redo it. And they're 12 cents a piece, $12 per 100. And so anyway, that's how it started. And this is the building where they were printed in. Now, this is the bank building. It went bust in 1929. It's in Berkeley, California, in Emeryville, actually. This bank building is chock full of artists and architects busily working to make our national parks more beautiful. When I see a bank building, that's what I want to do with it, a failed bank building. Today we have lots of failed bank buildings, but I'm not going to go there. But let's go inside this building and meet some of the artists. This is the top floor. These are artists that are working on whatever the national park wanted to have done. And if you look very closely over in the corner, I think I've got a mouse. No, I guess I don't. Right in the center, there's a woman back by the window, just off the right of that pole. And I'm going to go over and introduce you to her, and her name is Elizabeth Jeno. And I know this because her son works for the Historic Society and saved all these pictures. And she was one of the national park artists, but she was not the one that did these, the prints you'll see in the other room. She did other stuff, and this is one of her works. But she's one of the few that we have a name for and a face. And so I'm going to give her credit here today. The artist that gets the credit is Chester Don Powell. He went by Don Powell, or C. Don Powell. He was 116 pounds. He could not join the service in World War I. He became an artist, moved his family of 3 out to San Francisco, and he became a starving artist. He actually worked on roads. And one of his road buddies said, hey, there's a sign up in town that says they're hiring artists. And you're an artist, you really should be up in there doing that instead of out here digging roads. So he applied and began building these posters at the request of the Western Museum Labs. This is one of the few photographs we have of him working on Yosemite, and we got the 2 Yellowstones in here. So he's my hero, and he's the guy in the left here with his little white smock and little round glasses. I think I sort of see him as a hero there. A few similarities. To his right is Dale Miller. He was the screen printer. And what do we have on see if he's on the next slide here. Oops, I did something wrong here. This is the technique they used, developed by Anthony Vilonis, 1934. Mayor LaGuardia in New York City started posters in the early times of the Depression. And he hired artists. He wanted to keep people from gambling, and he wanted people to go out and fish. He called it Fish Tuesdays. And he'd get 50 artists in a room, and he'd hold up a design, not LaGuardia, but the head of the art school there, and they'd say, copy this poster. They'd get 50 posters, and every one of them was slightly different, but that was enough. And so they'd pin them out over the neighborhood, and they'd all go fishing. Anthony Vilonis said, this is crazy. I can streamline this. There's a Chinese system. It's called the silk screen, and he coined the word serigraph. And he and another couple of other people, I won't get into it, but he came up with a machine that he could actually reproduce these. And that is why we had 2 million posters printed. And that's why we have still 2,000 that are still around, because we could print so many of them. And it was still not very many. Wish he'd printed more. This is Yellowstone. Let's see, the center one is Lassen Volcanic, and this is the geyser on the lower right, and the upper left is the Yellowstone Falls. So EM, we know, did the 2 Yellowstones, and DM did Lassen Volcanic, and that would be Dale Miller. So we're kind of sleuthing, slowly figuring out who these people are and who did what. I thought we took this slide out, Brian, but I'll show it anyway. This is the 6 steps of silkscreen production. It's in the other room. This is the same picture here on the left of Chester Don Powell, and there's 5 other pictures with it. There's 6 screens showing how the ink layers go down. And this was used to sell to the national parks, this poster project. So they entice the park, see what we can do, and this is how we do it. It's the other half of that. And today we do the same thing. And I'll get into it a little bit, and then I'll let Brian speak here, but we build the screens the same way the WP artists did. We actually hand draw each layer. We make a photograph of it, a film. The film lays over the top of a photosensitive emulsion. We shine it with a UV light. The emulsion drops off, and then we squeegee the ink through whatever bare spots are there. It sounds kind of crazy, but it all lines up. And this is Cam Corey, Scott's brother. He has printed just as many posters, probably more posters than his brother, and he died of ALS about 5 years ago. It was real sad, and we really miss him. He deserves mention because he is really one of the artists too. And the day he died, he was working on a General Grant poster, and we put a General Grant poster in his coffin when we buried him. But anyway, that's Cam Corey. So I have all these black and white photos, and I've got this one original that I know what it looks like, and the pictures of others. And so what are the colors, and how do I decide this? And this is what I thought petrified forest might look like. And I went down there and I photographed it, looked at the logs, the petrified logs, and the sunsets, and took a lot of pictures. And I picked 6 colors, and this is what I picked. And then the phone rang, and Tessie Shirakawa calls. She said, "I'm Chief of Turpin. I've got an original." And I said, "You're kidding." And so I jumped in my 1948 Airstream trailer number 3, and I drove from Seattle all the way down to petrified forest. And lo and behold, here's an original on the left, and that's the one that I did on the right. So I missed it. Well, of course, I would miss it because it's black and white. So I get on my rubber gloves, and the archivist said, "All the ink down that end of the table, and wear gloves, and you're on the other end of the table." So I went back and forth about 150 times, and I came up with the actual colors. And so now I knew, and we went back and we found there were 8 screens, not 6. So we missed 2 screens. We actually had it 5 originally. So I'm a happy ranger there. And then we started publishing and correcting. And we published more and more. We got all 14 of these out. And then originals started showing up. And I didn't go out and find these. They're impossible to find. They find me. And it's the internet that did it. And I was Martina and I were in Antarctica for 6 months on the ice. I was working as a dentist for the National Science Foundation. And we're about a month before we came off the ice, and I get this email from this guy named Laurent in Los Angeles. And Laurent says, "Hey, I got 2 posters, originals. How do you know?" And he describes them. "Okay, you got 2 originals. What are they? And send me pictures. And hey, can you go back to the guy you bought them from," I said, "and find out who made them. Where did you get these from? I got to trace these back. I'm trying to get back to Alameda, California in the Western Museum labs. How did these get in this attic, in this junk store?" And he went back and he said, I don't want to tell the guy. He said, I paid $70 a piece for these things, and the guy will really get mad at me, and I'm in the art brokering business and so on. But I bought 7 more, he said. He got 9 posters. He actually got 10, and he got a 10th one anyway. So I said, "You're kidding. What are they?" And he sent me pictures of all of them. This was the mother lode. Unbelievable. $70 a piece. So I said, "Laurent promised me 2 things. I'm sitting here in Antarctica. I can't jump in my 1948 trailer and just run over there right now, but I will go there when I get back." And that was the first place we went. So we went over and talked to Laurent, and he wanted to sell them. He wanted a lot of money after I told him what they were probably worth. And he said, "Well, I'll hold them in a cluster for you." I said, "Please don't scatter them to the wind, and don't just put them on eBay, and keep them together, and I'm going to go out and try to get a buyer and try to keep these in a collection." And 2 years go by, and I couldn't find anything. So I offered him a sum of money, and he said no. He wanted, I think, $60,000. So they went up on eBay in Swan Gallery, New York. And the one on the right there sold for $9,000 in front of a microphone. And then these are the 2 that they're in the next room here. These are the ones that showed up 6 months ago. I'm actually trying to get some colors. I later purchased them, and Brian here has matched them, and we're reproducing these absolutely identically, including the initials carved in the bottom. We're going to offer them as a set for a discount for the National Park Centennial. So they'll be coming out real soon. This is the Teton you saw earlier, and this is another one. This is the one that Laurent had, and you can see the change in color here. This is probably from hanging in a barn, or else the ink artist said, "Oops, we're short of ink, and let's just, we don't have any more gray, let's throw in some red." And this is the 3rd one we found. Now notice this one is cut on the left, and it's cut off the bottom. This came up in a plant press from White Sands, New Mexico. It was a piece of cardboard, and it had a plant stuck between it. So these things often just became cardboard. One of my fascinations was, how did the artists make these? Did they take them off postcards, photographs? Did they go out and actually go there? And I think for the Grand Canyon, because of its complexity, they went out there. I asked the park, where was this made? "There's no such place," they said. "This is just fictional." And then I was out at Moran viewpoint on the east entrance of Grand Canyon. And they mentioned, by the way, these buttes were, there were no buttes like that in the park. It's like in the Grand Teton, I know all the mountains. And I said, okay, and I drove around, and a couple of trips later, I drove to this viewpoint, and it wasn't the buttes that gave it away, it's the river. And if you look at the river on the left, and there's a perfect little bend on the river on the right, and then over here, I'll just point it out real quick, but you've got this little bluff here equals this little bluff here, and the river in here equals a river in here. So it wasn't the buttes that gave it away, it was a river. So I figured out where it was, and I can only make the assumption that the WP artist would have had to be there to do it. So I think they did do plein air construction of these designs. I'm not 100% sure. The last in this series was Bandelier National Monument. This is kind of funny, but I published 13 of these black and white negatives, and all of a sudden Bandelier calls me up and they say, hey, we got a WPA poster. And I said, boy, are you sure? Yeah, it says made by WPA CCC right on the poster. It's right at the very bottom here. Tiny little print. And I said, let's see. They said, well, we'd like to have it reproduced. And I said, well, can you spare one that I can look at? Oh, yeah, we've got 13 of them. I said, you got 13? He said, yeah, we found them in the superintendent's file drawer system in his office. They've been there for 50 years. They were cut in half as file drawer dividers. They work. And here is this very poster they sent me. And I go, holy mackerel, I forgot to return it. And this is how these posters disappear, if you think about it. They're out of sight, out of mind, and then the next thing you know, it's the next generation. So I call up the park. Oh, we'll get back to you. And so I called up again just a few months ago, and I said, I'd really like to take this to show you folks, and it's in the other room on display right now. And this will be donated back to the Harpers Ferry collection when we're done with it. But this is very unique. It's stylistically different completely from Grand Teton, the first one, and the Bandelier is the last one. They're totally stylistically different than the 12 in between. And I don't know who the artist was on this. I doubt it was Don Powell. So here I am on Alcove House in this very site. And then Park started coming to me and said, hey, can you make one that looks just like the others and kind of slip it in and it looked like it was made back in 1938? And I said, absolutely, that's what I do. I'm a dentist, right? But I do match, I should throw in here, one of my favorite things to do in dentistry was to take a broken central incisor and make a porcelain crown and match it perfectly to the natural tooth. I had my own little porcelain ovens and stains and dyes, and I love this kind of thing. And so I thought, I bet I can do this. So I called up my artist friend again, and he's getting kind of tired of me by now, but he says, okay, one more. So I sketched this out. These sketches are in the museum. I took this picture yesterday, and it shows kind of what went through my head about what I wanted in this thing, and I colored some of it. I didn't want to do the whole thing. And he painted a painting of it. And we made the painting because that's what the WPA did. Today we do it completely different today, as Brian will explain in just a sec. But back then we made a painting. The painting hangs today in the superintendent's office in Devil's Tower. It's the only WPA poster that has its own little painting, companion painting. So it's kind of unique in that way. And this, ironically, sells better in California than it does in Wyoming because of the movie. Close Encounters, is it? Anyway, is really the artist behind this. I can't say enough nice things about Brian because he's such a nice guy. And this really works. It goes forward, right? So take it away and show them how you do it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be back.
Again, I'm Brian Maebius, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we go about reconstructing a WPA poster. And here's one of our contemporary posters of Big Bend National Park in Texas. And I happen to be from Texas and was able to hike and camp at Big Bend as a child, so it was fun to do this one, a couple years ago. To give you a little background, I have a art major with a geology minor, and a few years after I graduated from college, I spent a summer at Badlands National Park as an intern and worked at a fossil site at the Big Pig Dig, where I also was able to illustrate the fossils and put my degrees to use. So a few years down the road, or actually around that same time, I visited Teton National Park and came upon Ranger Doug's note cards. And I was totally captivated by the style of these posters and was really inspired. And so I did what any artist with a geology minor might do, and I mocked up my own poster of Badlands National Park. And it's kind of a crude colored pencil sketch, but I wrote a letter, asked Doug if he had ever considered doing this for any other parks, and sent it off. And a few weeks later, I got a letter back from Doug and said, in fact, they had already done one of Devil's Tower, and he would keep me in mind down the road as he looked into producing other posters. So fast forward a couple years, and I went to grad school in scientific illustration, and one of the components of the scientific illustration, something I'd never thought I'd get into, I was always a traditional watercolor type artist, was graphic design, and I learned a program called Adobe Illustrator. And so Doug and I had fallen out of touch by then. This was about 2001, and I was still captivated by the WPA posters, and I came across this. eBay was relatively new at the time, and so I started bidding on this poster. I didn't know anything about bidding, and I was just really drawn to this poster, and I kept getting outbid by a ranger, Doug. It turns out that we both got sniped in the end by another bidder from Broward County Library in Florida who wound up winning the poster, and it wound up in part of their collections, and apparently they have an exhibit and a collection of WPA art. So we were happy to lose the poster to someone like that, and at the same time, Doug and I reconnected. So with that said, let me mention a few things about what makes these posters unique, and one of them is the obvious bold blocks of color, and sort of their organic shapes, and some detail, but not too much detail. Usually 6 colors or less, which makes them distinct as well, and then they all have sort of this block style font. And anyhow, so Doug and I reconnected. Doug asked if I would do Bryce Canyon National Park as the next poster. And I said, sure, would you consider doing it with me using a graphic design program and creating the layers and separating out the layers. And so Doug sent me a photo he had taken of Bryce Canyon, and I thought, oh great, I'll use this as a template. This is going to be easy. Well, I was wrong. It was a fairly complex image, and being the first one, I had a bit of trial and error. And one thing I quickly learned was don't show any computer lines, don't show any straight edges, the obvious giveaway that it was done digitally. Here's an image in process, and you can see I was trying to create those bold blocks of colors. I was using a mouse at the time, so I was clicking every single time I was making a shape to create a point in this vector style art. And so here's a slide just showing the points of one of those colors, and there's 13,000 clicks of the mouse in this one layer. So that was something I learned right away. Okay, I gotta get some better technology if I'm going to keep doing this. So another thing was an advantage to the computer approach was that I could have an unlimited amount of choices for color. And so Doug and I played back and forth quite a bit on different color options. And then I also found that I could zoom in as much as I wanted, up to 6,000%. And so I learned that I needed to find that balance of not getting too much detail and taking away what makes these posters unique. And so that was part of the learning curve as well. And then finally, with all those clicks of the mouse, the fonts were very time-consuming to create. So the first thing we did was Doug purchased some font building software for me, and we made our own WPA font. There was nothing available online at the time that was close to what we needed. And so I took letters from every poster, and I recreated them and created a font. And as you can see here in Olympic, there's quite a bit of text. And so having the font available really sped up the process for me, and we could play with any variation in size of fonts and move things around easily. You can also see in the Department of Interior poster we just did that there's quite a lot of text as well. And today there are several fonts out there that are much closer to that same style. Occasionally we'll still do a poster that has a custom font. Here Ranger Doug wanted to use the font which is found in the entrance signs to Crater Lake National Park, and so we'll mix those in, and that again is hand done. And so along with the modern tools of using a font, I quickly purchased a graphic tablet here and a stylus. And I will also use the trackpad on my MacBook Pro to be able to sketch more directly onto the screen. And what I'm really hoping for, if it ever falls within our budget, is to be able to draw directly on a screen with a touch screen. So let me talk briefly about what goes into the composition of a poster and how Ranger Doug and I develop a poster. Doug will contact the parks and he will get as many references as he can. He's looking for brochures, historic photos, historic place names, things that you would expect to see in a park. Here is a lantern slide that Doug found at Hawaii in their archives. And then he produced a quick sketch, sent it to me, and said, can we make this work? Well, it turns out we strayed quite a bit from what we originally planned to do. And I'm going to show you an animation that shows some of those changes from where we started. And note the color. Note Bert and Edna on the right are now on the left. And you know, the volcanic magma has moved around quite a bit. And the background mountains or crater have changed as we go until we get to the final poster image. So you can see there's a lot that goes into starting with a sketch versus our final product. Here's another example, this time for General Grant National Park, where I used a historic poster as sort of my inspiration and sent a sketch to Ranger Doug and wanted to create some of that sense of light coming through, filtering through the trees, which Doug had recommended. And so I'm going to show you how we develop the layers of a poster like this. Once I contact our printer and ask him the best layer order, we go about separating the layers. So here I'm going to show you each color being built up on the layer before, and starting with the lightest yellow, the lighter blue, the orange, the browns, until you get to the final image with the darkest blue on top. And again, here's the original inspiration, so you can see where we will sometimes refer back to the originals to get ideas for new posters. And so let me briefly say that with these historic posters, we assume that they are always done from light to dark, as this image that Doug showed earlier has a diagram showing how they did each layer, the lightest colors first, until they finished with the darkest green in the glacier poster. Well, it turns out they didn't always go from light to dark. A few weeks ago, Doug sent me this original Yellowstone poster that he acquired, and Doug wanted to faithfully recreate the poster, so I got out my grandfather's old geology hand lens and started looking closely at the poster. And as I got down in there, I could see that they had done the darkest layers first, which was a little bit unexpected. And I'm going to show you an animation that shows the layer order. I actually did the lightest blue first, and then they did a final layer of light blue as well. But after that light blue, they started with the darkest brown, and then the dark blue, kind of a bluish teal, the lighter brown, that lighter green, and then the final lightest blue layer. So as we look into creating posters down the road, we're going to explore the possibilities and work with the printers. And seeing 98, and in 2012, we finally produced a poster 14 years later of the park that I got to work at, so it was fun to see this come to life. And in our future direction, we have plans for quite a few more parks. Here's a sneak peek. At that same time I sent the Badlands image, I sent an image of dinosaur, again, a crude sketch. But Doug saw enough potential there that again, you know, he was willing to work with me down the road. And here is the work in progress poster. We're still getting feedback from the parks about the text to use and what would have been historically accurate at that time. And then we have plans for other posters, Redwood, National State Parks, and Haleakala down the road. And so I'm going to hand it back to Doug, and we'll wrap this up, and you'll be able to see these in the exhibit hall.
Good job. Okay, just a few more words here, and then we'll maybe retire to the museum itself, and we'll field some questions first, of course. I started with a couple of slides of Alaska, and I want to end with a couple slides. It's my home state, and it's considered the most beautiful state in the Union. I guess we'd all argue that. About 4 or 5 years ago, the Sierra Club approached me, and they wanted to do a 50th anniversary for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And turns out that Martina and I had worked as a dental team in a lot of the North Slope villages as well. It was part of our paper route, if you will, of dental services. So this is a flight in from, I think we're landing from Point Lay, coming into Barrow. And you'll notice this is very telling, but you'll notice there's no ice. This is the middle of the winter. As a result, the polar bears, of course, are landlocked. This polar bear was killed 4 hours after I took this picture. Went into the village. This is Fred McAtant's Beauty of the Arctic right here. After spending 6 months in Antarctica and then going to the North Slope, actually we'd been there before and after, but it's one of the most beautiful areas, maybe overlooked areas and least visited areas in the U.S. purvey of the Department of Interior. We love it up there. This is some of my patients. They're just about as cute as you can get. They have a wonderful sense of humor. And this is both a sunrise and a sunset. This is a Sidney Lawrence sky. So we have Fred McAtant's for the bear, and we have a Sidney Lawrence. And it points back to art, you know, and how artists perceive our national parks. And they really make our national parks in a lot of ways. They create memories that live on and kind of focus through a lens what we often miss when we first go and visit these parks. Anyway, when we came back from Kaktovik, it was the week that Mount Redoubt had erupted, and so we were in Fairbanks for 3 days. We had nothing to do, so we went up to Chena Hot Springs and soaked, and we went to the University of Alaska Museum of the North. It's one of the most fabulous museums, except this one, of course. And there's a whole series of Sidney Lawrence and Fred McAtant's and a lot of the painters of the North. And of course, I knew better. I knew Marty Murray for last 30 years of her life. She and OLAS, I'm sure many of you know about them, but they did all the work that created the Arctic Refuge, this poster that I was going to do. And so I took Bert and Edna out, and I put Marty and OLAS in based on this photograph that Marty would show me every year when I'd come down and work in the park. Marty lived to the ripe old age of 101, and a wonderful, wonderful woman. She received the Audubon Medal. Both she and her husband did. O.S. Murray from Jack Kennedy, and Marty received it from Jimmy Carter. And she went on to receive many more medals. But Marty became more and more incapacitated in her last decade of life, and I had not been to the Arctic Refuge, and so I never really got to thank Marty for what she did, and she was always so proud of. And so I want to thank her tonight, and I want to thank Olis, and I want to thank the Department of Interior, because you guys are the other half of what Marty and Olis had spent their lives doing. So thanks for coming. I think that's the last slide, and I'm going to go back. Oops, I was going to leave that on for inspiration, but anyway, please be happy to, Brian and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm sure there are just millions.
Hi, thanks very much, by the way. This is a fantastic presentation, incredibly interesting. I came across your guys' stuff, I think, on the internet while trying to find some of the original prints myself. When I said, I remembered them seeing a clip or a picture somewhere, and I knew they existed, and I wanted to get some in my house. and couldn't find any. They weren't on eBay. They weren't, even some of the higher-end galleries didn't have any for sale. There were some really rotten, I guess, lithographs if you just wanted a poster to put up. So I was delighted when I came across your guys' website, and you had a great story, and now the posters hang in our house, and they look great. So thank you for this. This is a great story of discovery and history. I wanted to ask, I think you said this already, but how many do you think existed total, different styles? And based on your experience in encountering them and people sending them to you, for those of us who might be out looking around and stuff, where do you think more might be? And certainly we'll contact you if we find them, but the number and then ways they might come up.
Well, you know, that's my burning question too, and I wish I had the answer for that. Like I said earlier, these posters find me, and I can't find them. It's the needle in the haystack, so the internet is kind of the magnet that pulls that out of the straw, so to speak. We do know there's 42 originals that have turned up. We have about half are in the public domain. I've got a collection of 4. The 5th one is the bandolier that I've had, and I'm donating as well, so that would be 5. There are quite a few in private collections. 2 were taken from the artist's son and not returned, and we're trying to get those back right now. They're very popular. Of course, they're just an antique. And all I know is that the department superintendent's notes and bandolier said these were to be distributed to the chambers of commerce around the parks. So the first place I'd look would be around the parks. We still have 2 posters that we haven't found. Boy, if anybody can find them, I'll pay top dollar, and I'll donate them back to the Park Service. They are Wind Cave and Great Smoky Mountain. And so the 2 you see out there that are historic are made-up colors. And the Great Smoky Mountain had a big square out of it, just completely gone, so we filled it in with what we thought would go there. I think maybe that answers your question, or maybe not. But
I think we have the Great Smoky Mountain. We have that one in our house. Yeah.
But the last auction records were in 2006 from Swan Gallery, and it was $9,000 for the Grand Canyon. And they vary from about $2,000 to $10,000 right now. And you know, it's a supply and demand market. And I see them going up rather than down. What I will say though is that our reproductions, especially these 2 they're in the other room, are absolutely indistinguishable, thanks to Brian. So if you can't find originals, we can fix you up with the next best thing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a question. Given how old some of these posters are and how they're been not necessarily well kept, how confident are you that you really know what the original color was as opposed to what they look like today?
Well, there's a couple of ways we've done this. One is of multiple copies we compare. The inks generally speaking, the inks that they use were very stable in color. Today we use a lot of pigments and things and printers and all that. You can buy these on the internet, by the way. Virtually everything is copied. And these fade within a year or 2. And I don't recommend buying them. And they're actually selling them for just under what we're selling an actual screen print for. The NASDAR inks we use today are very, very complex chemistry. They're environmentally created, et cetera, and they're $160 a gallon. We have over 300 gallons in our inventory right now, and we buy it by the truckload.
So really the best, maybe the best way is to have multiple posters and compare and try and find, you know, a medium, but it'd be hard to know for sure if there was some level of fading.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is we don't know. We know only what we see, and we can extrapolate, like those 3 Grand Teton posters, you see them get redder and redder.
Well, that's what I was wondering, whether you try to kind of extrapolate back when you reproduce to get to what it might have looked like originally.
We try, and I guess you'll see some of the originals we found, and you'll see what I guess they were, and then you'll see my corrections. And some of them we got real close. We found a Fort Marion, and I got like 5 out of 6, or 6 out of 7, 7 out of 8 colors dead on.
Well,
and the one thing other is that we were very lucky in these Mount Rainiers. I didn't mention them, but this fellow called up and said, I got 2 Mount Rainiers. And so I said, I'll be right over at your house. And boy, here they were. And I said, boy, can I buy one of these? I'm trying to rebuild this set. He goes, I got 2 kids. They're both park rangers. I couldn't give you one. Well, I said, if you find a third, would you call me? Okay. A year goes by. The phone rings. It's Dwayne again. I got a third one. I said, you're kidding me. I'll be right over. So I get my Airstream trailer. Anyway, I went over his house, and there's 3 posters on his table, but there are 3 different posters than the 2 I saw before. And I said, wait a minute, I've not seen any of these before. He said, well, I was going to clean the glass for you in the frame. I took them out, and there's 3 posters sandwiched together, 3 Mount Rainiers. The middle one was pristine, and it matched the color of the one that was facing the glass. So that was one thing that told me that these are very stable inks, and some of them were. So anyway, it's a good question. I really don't know.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's take this mic here,
Go ahead.
and I'll get back to you. Go ahead.
I'm curious about the WPA artists themselves. We saw some women, was it a combination of men, women, and dare I ask, were any of them African-American artists?
Oh, I'm sure they were. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Brian does, or, Kristen Noon would be the guy to ask, the guy that wrote the book. You could see what was in that room. The artists, first of all, were not allowed to sign their works. There were a couple exceptions. One is Alexander Dux, and you'll see on the Caves, See America Caves poster in the other room, you'll see DUX. He actually put it in the screen. And that was an exception, and the others were the scratched in initials. So we really don't know who made these, except for these few photos. So what you see in the photos is what I know. I'm sure there was, I don't know, I won't answer that because I really don't know. But it'd be a good research project for somebody. But thank you for asking, that's a good question.
Is this the only, do you only make posters for the National Park Service, or have you made them, have you worked for, I think I recognize this from like our town. I'm from a little town in Indiana, and they had posters made up for our centennial or something crazy. Does your company, or do you design other than the National Park Service?
We do get quite a few requests for anything from wedding invitations to,
You name it.
Oh, so this is
unheard
a big
of
company.
small state parks and that kind of thing.
Dollywood.
A Dollywood theme park.
Really?
And
Yep.
and depending on the request, Doug will sometimes refer those to me, and Doug tends to stick to the national parks and the historic parks for the time period, and so yeah, that's kind of. I did some.
did.
Thank
I
you.
wound up doing some images for Dollywood, yes, as
And then
a side job. But one of the deals was that we would make it distinctly different enough from our historic posters that there would be no confusion and no overlap in any
Keep
way.
them separate.
Yeah.
But
But an artist has to make a living, so yeah.
I had a slide that I took out of my talk, and maybe I'll say it here, but if you Google WPA National Park posters, you'll get about 85,000 hits. And everybody there's a retro revolution going on right now. It's not just in posters, it's in virtually everything. I would like to say that we started it, and we kind of rode this wave up, And I think we're in a good position to really, it's been out in front of the public for 20 years, and it's today doing better than, in the worst economic times, I think we're kind of selling nostalgia, but everybody's doing it. You'll see people, just Google it, and you'll see a lot of our stuff on there, and you'll see counterfeits of our stuff, and it's just nebulous. These images show up on doormats, soap wrappers, underwear, t-shirts, coffee bags. I could go on all day. It's everywhere. There's more.
If I may ask a second question.
Sure.
The parks that you've referred to that were part of the original collection all seem to be western parks, with the exception of Harper's Ferry. Did you do the parks right here in the city, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C.?
We have plans to do, I would like to do a monument series here, and it would be stylistically different. I wouldn't use the same fonts, but I think it would make a good cohesive card set and a poster set. And we think of doing Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and maybe include Mount Rushmore and Gettysburg is sort of what in my mind. We just actually did, we haven't mentioned this, but we did Patterson Falls. It's America's newest national park. They called me and said, can you brand some imagery for us? And so actually Brian did the work, and I went out and met with the the proto-superintendent there who actually pushed the legislation through. And so we're working on Eastern parks. Eastern National, the bookstores in the eastern half of the U.S. have been clamoring for years, can you do more Eastern parks? There are two, by the way. It's Great Smoky and Fort Marion. Those are the only two. And this one. So yes, we're doing more and more Eastern parks. But the markets are kind of funny, and to put out an edition, for a first edition of 1,000 prints, it costs about $20,000. It's expensive. It's the artwork, it's the visitation, it's printing and redrawing all these screens, lining them up, getting the colors, and then we print 1,000 copies. And we really barely break even on these. So the smaller parks, as we get down into the lesser and lesser visitation, not that they're any less beautiful or whatever, but we just can't justify a huge expensive print.
Were the East Coast parts part of the original WPA projects?
Just two.
Just those two.
Well, the poster project, there were two, and that would be Great Smoky and Fort Marion.
With regards to Illustrator, I'm wondering if you've kept account of or have an estimate of how long you spend in Illustrator.
It allows you to make all these, huge changes relatively easily, but in that process, there's so much potential for other designs that at some point, usually we have a deadline for a park where they want to get a poster out by their spring season, in which case it's very nice to have a deadline because it forces us, to cut it off and say it's this color, it's this design.
And then also in Illustrator, how long have you been using it for, and have you found that any of the newer versions have made things a lot easier than the versions you started with?
Yeah, about 15 years that I've been using it, and the newer versions have offered some faster options for copying a shape or recreating a shape. But I found that in the end, it's hand-drawn that works the best for me, and the newest, latest, greatest technology doesn't necessarily help me with, trying to separate out colors from different layers. But there are a lot of tools out there that are worth exploring. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, one more.
Are there
Hi, Coulter.
any posters at other museums?
Any other posters on display at other museums?
Yes, that's a very good question. We have there's a group called Preservation of New Deal Art. It started in New Mexico. It's spread to all 50 states, and in San Francisco right now there's another small exhibit going on, and they have other artwork by WPA. I think they have architecture as well, and I think it's over in the Berkeley. It's very near this Western Museum Labs. And then there's another retire to the gallery, and I'll stay till midnight if you like. Thank you very much for coming. It was really a pleasure.